Welcome back to Page Break Podcast with Rich and Brian. We're here with Rex Davis. He's an author that we're going to be chatting with today. I'm going to let him introduce himself and his book and just tell you a little bit about what he's got going on right now.
Yeah, well, thanks. It's good to be with you guys today. And I recently released my first book. It's called Free Fall. You're looking at not the only guy, but one of the only guys that survived a parachute not opening. And so that was a painful experience, to say the least. But I had this book on my heart, so recently released it. But I spent 22 years on active duty in the Army, 10 years in corporate America, and then I've been on a full-time in a full-time role as a pastor at a large church for the last 10 years. Count that up. I've been around a minute.
Yeah. Well, that's so I remember I was driving and Rich called me and we talk about as much during the day as like you would talk to your spouse. We literally all day long, Rich and I text and call back and forth because he's in Oklahoma and I'm here in Indiana. But I remember when he called me, he told me your story, and I think it took like a few seconds to actually click. Like, wait, now what? Like he fell like, and the parachute it literally didn't open. Like it took me a minute to like I don't know how that's possible. So obviously the first question is, and I don't want to give everything away. Obviously, you want people to buy your book, but what an unbelievable, crazy story. So just kind of walk us through maybe the process of, was it just a normal day, a normal activity, like, and then all of a sudden something obviously went awry.
Yeah. And without getting into a lot of technical details, it was a night jump, which made it all the worse. It was zero illumination that night. So you couldn't literally see your hand in front of your face. It was that dark. And we were jumping both doors of a C-141 aircraft. That's a jet aircraft. And so the jump masters, unfortunately, got off sequence and put two of us out opposing doors at the same time. So I go out this door, another jumper goes out that door. Well, you come out, if you do that at the same time, you meet underneath the aircraft, and one of two things is going to happen. You are either going to be the jumper that gets all of the air and your parachute deploys properly, or you're going to be the other guy that does not get the air and your parachute is going to come out in what we call a cigarette roll and it just flops. Well, I was the other guy. First guy got all the air. I didn't. My parachute just flops over the top of his. And I was able to ride him down the majority of the jump. And then we separated about 200 feet off the ground. And 200 feet was enough to hurt really, really bad. So it put me in the hospital for 45 days, broke my back, broke my hip in two places, split my pelvic girdle completely apart. That was the most, because that's your pivot point. That's where all your weight is, your pressure, everything. So that was the most painful part of it. But here's how to answer your question, Brian. I had a pastor in Louisiana. He loved this story, and he would carry me around and he'd say, hey, fellas, and the parachute just didn't open properly.
Yeah. Wow.
Well,
Just
that's
unbelievable.
yeah, it's an incredible story. Now, so again, we don't like to give a ton away about the book because we're going to include the link to the book in the notes, and we
Sure.
want people to click on it and buy it. But so you've obviously taken this story that it's one of those things where the devil tried to kill you, but God meant it for good, and you've extrapolated some life lessons. What do you want people to take away from this after when they close the book? What do you want their overall reaction to be?
I want them to see themselves in the stories that I tell in the book. And I wrote the book 20 years ago, and I just threw the draft in the drawer. I knew something was missing. I didn't know what. And I kind of thought it was the parachute accident itself. I'm like, do you start the book with that? Do you end the book with that? Well, the answer was neither one. I wound up putting it in the middle. And so there's some life lessons that lead up to the parachute accident. And then there's some life lessons that followed after the accident. But the title of Free Fall, here's what I learned. I'm like, hey, I had a physical free fall and it was painful. It was bad. But the truth is, everyone can relate to the free fall feeling, regardless of whether it's a bankruptcy, a divorce, a betrayal by a best friend, a health challenge. Every single person can relate to the physical feeling of falling through the air and oh my gosh, I'm not going to be able to catch myself. And for me, it was a parachute accident. But for every person that reads the book, I ask you the question, hey, what's your free fall? May not be a parachute not opening, but I guarantee you there's something in your life that you've had that free fall feeling. And the whole point is, how do we navigate that? And then how do we recover from that and regain our balance?
Yeah. No, that's great, and you're right. It's like I just talked to an author a few minutes ago about, her book is about trauma and overcoming trauma, and hers was on, a health crisis, but like you said, there's any number of things that are challenging for us. So, yeah, we all deal with life, and in life, there's always challenges. What's been the main takeaway for people who have read the book? Like, what kind of response have you received?
The response has actually been great. It's been humbling. I did not write the book with the intention of it being used in small groups, but I have 5 different groups in our local area that they just decided, you know what? We're going to use this group to lead our small group discussions this spring. And so that's humbling when somebody comes up to you and says, hey, I love the book so much. We're reading it together every week and we're talking about a different chapter. I guess I am a small group, very relational guy. And so I put reflective questions at the end of each chapter. So it does kind of lend itself to further discussion because that's what I wanted. I didn't want each chapter to end with, hey, that was a great story. Matter of fact, the title at the end of each chapter is, hey, great story. So what? And then I ask the reflective questions. How do you take the story that I just told and reflect and then use it to help you navigate whatever you're going through in your own life? And I learned that from my senior pastor years ago. He said, I don't answer, especially when you're preaching a message or even writing a book, don't answer questions that no one's asking. You know, I may be the most passionate in the world about it, and I really want to talk about the subject, but if nobody's asking questions about that subject, so what? Your story.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's cool.
that's
I hadn't heard that before. That's good advice. So I've got a this is not off topic necessarily, but when I think of a book like this, and Brian and I have worked on a lot of books, around 6 or 7,000 in the last 16 years. Sometimes when people are in that moment of free fall or that period of their life of free fall, like there are times when it happens when it's not your fault, right? Like in this particular instance, somebody else made a mistake and you had to, pivot and recover. But there are lots of times when free fall happens in your life and it is your fault. Like you made a dumb decision. So do you address that? And if you do, how do you build in hope when I'm real bad about looking at something and going, God cannot help me through this because I did it. Like
Yeah.
I can be comforted when my dad passed away because I didn't have anything, that was natural. But if I do something dumb, why would God help me through that? Do you address any of that? And if so, how do you deal with that?
Yeah, I think I do. Maybe in an indirect way, Rich, but again, you're absolutely right. Sometimes we just made a bad decision. And if we're all honest, every one of us have made those bad decisions. And so I think you just have to navigate that, realizing, hey, some of this is going to be painful. Some of it I brought on myself. But again, what do you want the end result to be like? I just sat with a guy yesterday that admitted, hey, I was an alcoholic and I made some really, really bad decisions, but I got to a point in my life that I just decided, hey, the outcome that I want for myself, for my wife, for my kids, it has to be different than the current path that I'm on. Well, it requires some different habits, some different disciplines, some different thought processes. Now, I look, where do you go to get that though? Well, some trusted mentors, some trusted friends, maybe someone that has experienced something similar to that. I like the Bible. I know
Yeah.
it may not be popular in all circles right now, but I think the Bible has got timeless wisdom for helping us navigate some of these challenges that we bring on ourselves through our bad decisions.
Yeah, that's a great answer.
Yeah, for sure. So did you say you wrote it 22 years ago?
Yes, I wrote it 20 years
Mm.
ago, and a version now here's a cool thing. That version that I wrote 20 years ago is still in the drawer on a thumb drive. Once I realized the so what question, hey Rex, you got to take your experience and make it applicable to people. I
Yeah.
still, even though the book is in print and published, I have not gone back and looked at what I wrote 20 years ago.
Oh, wow. Wow.
I totally rewrote the book. But
Yeah.
once I figured out, hey, here's what you got to do, I rewrote the book from start to scratch. I have not even looked at what I wrote 20 years ago. Not that it doesn't have good things in it. I'm sure it does. And I'm going to go back at some point and say, wow, I should have included that. Or maybe I need to write a second book and I need to pull some of this stuff out. But the cool thing is, 20 years ago, all that information still in a drawer, and the book as is was totally rewritten in 2025 from start to finish.
Wow.
That's cool.
That is
I
crazy.
if you do decide to do a second book, certainly call us. This is not a book we published. We just ended up chatting, and this conversation came about because of that, but we would have liked to publish it, I'll say that. So most of the people who listen to this podcast are would-be authors, and so we usually like to do this last, 7 or 8, 9 minutes, asking you some questions about the one we get the most, and so I'm gonna ask it first, and every author has a different answer, so I think this is what's cool about this. When you were rewriting that second manuscript, the one that you published, did you deal with writer's block ever, or just a period where you were shut down and you couldn't figure out what to do next? And if you did, what are some practical ways you dealt with that?
Here is the answer to the question. Actually, I didn't. And I know that that is a common thing. But I had 20 years. Here's the sad part of this. I had 20 years to think about this. You have a book in a drawer that you know you've already written, and you think it's maybe kind of sort of good, but you know there's something missing. Well, I actually went on a journey to find out, well, what is the missing thing? I went to writers' conferences. I called other pastors. I read other books. I went to seminars. Guys, I sat in a women's conference for women writers. Your boy, one guy and 600 women. You talk about swallowing your pride, but I just felt like I can learn something from these women, and I did. But here's the technical answer to your question. Even though I didn't experience a block once I was ready to go, the key for me, and I couldn't believe I missed this, I road mapped the book. And I have road mapped, when you're doing the podcast, you guys kind of got a roadmap for where you want this podcast to go and the things we want to talk about. We just didn't get on here and start talking. You have a mental, maybe even a written roadmap. Well, every pastor has that. Every business leader, when he's leading a business meeting, they have a roadmap of where they're going. Well, I missed that in the initial preparation of the book. As much road mapping as I've done in my career, I never thought about doing it for the book. And once I had a book coach and he said roadmap. And I'm like, what? And he said roadmap. And he gave me 3 different methods to do it. And so the way I used it, any thought that I had, I put on a yellow sticky note, 3M sticky notes. And when I got that thought, whether it was a sentence or whether it was a word, I just wrote it and I put it on a board. And then I wrote another thought and I put it on the board. And as you started to do that, after about 10 sentences and 10 thoughts on the board, I began to see the book develop. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that's what's missing. Now I have a roadmap and I know where I'm going.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. So you preemptively, some of that stuff you preemptively dealt with in your research and in your, kind of you're trying to figure out what to do. So then when the writing actually started, you'd kind of already dealt with the roadblocks. That's good.
Absolutely. And I think if John Maxwell were sitting here, he's got the typical thing he always says, just do something. Take an axe. He calls it taking the axe and chop the tree. You're not going to chop the whole tree down today, but
Yeah.
hit the tree 5 times. And I think there's a lot of wisdom in that for writers, for speakers, for athletes, whatever it is that you're attempting to get better at, 5 strokes a day with the axe. And eventually you're going to cut that tree down.
Yeah.
That's
So
good.
I'm guessing that based on what you've said, when you wrote it 22 years ago, you were writing a story, but when you rewrote it, you had more of a purpose. Is that a way to put it, you think?
Yeah, I think so. And that's a great question. Here I have a really great relationship with my dad. I don't know my biological father, by the way. He abandoned my mother before I was born. And then So there's some other trauma in the beginning of my story. But my biological dad left my mother before I was born, abandoned her. She got cancer and she died when I was 7. So I got adopted by this godly man and woman that gave me an unbelievable example. And so the truth is, the book I wrote 20 years ago, even though it was kind of sort of about the parachute accident, I really wanted to honor my dad, and I wanted to tell about the values and the virtue and the discipline that he instilled in me and what he did for me that a biological dad didn't do. Well, when I rewrote the book is really a tribute to my dad. And it says a lot of things about my dad in it. And here's the cool part. My editor, after it was all done, she said, "Your dad sounds like a really cool person. You ought to write a book about him." And I just started
Mhm.
laughing and I said, "I just did." The whole book, even though it's not about my dad per se, but I am my father's son, and everything in that book points to my earthly dad and the drive, the discipline, the determination, the values that he put in me. That book points to him, my earthly dad, but it points to my heavenly dad too. Because I finally figured out all those values that I was seeing in my earthly dad that adopted me, the guy was golden. He was amazing. And then I finally figured out, where did he get that stuff from? He got it from God. He got it from his heavenly Father, and he just passed it
Yeah.
on to me. That's a long answer to a short question, Brian.
No, that's great. That's wonderful.
Yeah, that's great stuff to hear. Brian and I have both recently lost our fathers, and they were great godly examples to us. So that definitely hits home for us. If you're looking for a target customer, let's say this book's on a shelf somewhere, and there are people milling around the room. Who's the ideal candidate to pick this book up and really get something out of it?
That is a great question. And matter of fact, when you open the book, I did something that really my editor said, I don't know that you need to put that page in it because you address it later in the book. And I said, no, 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 we're going to leave it. And so it has an introduction, it has a forward, but then there's a page that says the audience. And I specifically tell people who I'm talking to. I'm talking to any man that feels like he never measured up. He's tried to get ahead, he's tried to do the right thing, and he just cannot seem to catch a break. And he's disappointed, he's dejected, and he just doesn't know what to do. If it's a guy, I'm talking to him. I'm also talking to women. I didn't want because I thought, hey, I'm a soldier, I'm an army guy. People are going to see this free fall book and they're going to think this is a guy's book. No, it's not. It's for women too. And I have found that women enjoy the book just as much as men do, because here's the thing. Women, when they see me, I'm 66 years old. But when I tell my story about my mother dying at 7, and oh, yeah, by the way, we moved in with my grandparents and they died within 18 months of us moving in. So not only did my mother die, the other 2 adults we lived with, they died. Car wreck, heart attack, cancer. That's a lot of trauma for a young kid.
Wow.
Well, here's what I've learned with women. When women hear me talk or when they read my book, they don't see a 66-year-old guy telling a story. They see a 5-year-old little boy living that story, broken and shattered and not knowing where to turn, and their maternal nature kicks in, and we just have this connection. So any woman that's been mistreated, that's been abused in any way, that has one of those heartbreak stories in her own life, this book's for her. And then for my younger generations, I address them. I think our younger generations are looking for truth. I can't tell you the whole truth, but I can point you to truth. And I wrote the book in a way where it asks you reflective questions. Hey, what is the truth about myself, about the world I live in, about the God that created this world? If you got questions, and a lot of young people do, this book's for them. And then finally, people, there are, and you could say, man, that sounds like you wrote it for everybody. I did, but I honed in on specific things. And for the elder generation like me, I think some of us, we feel disregarded in this generation because things we saw our elders esteemed and almost revered because they were elders. Well, we get to the point now that we're elders. Well, I think some of us feel like we're just totally disregarded because we're older, we can't operate, our iPhone maybe as fast as everybody else does. I have a 19-year-old. You get about 3 seconds to do something before she grabs it out of your hand. And she's amazing. But again, the book's for older people that feel maybe, hey, left out, and they don't know how to navigate this high tech culture that we're living in.
Yeah. Well, that's great. That's a good example for many different, segments of the population. So that's good. That's
Yeah,
good.
it's nice to have more than one group. I tell people this all the time. I use this exact statement. If you've written a book on how to fix transmissions on 1957 Oldsmobiles, your audience is real small.
Absolutely.
But from a strictly business standpoint, obviously, the bigger your audience or prospective audience, the better. So I know we're over on time a little bit. I was actually a little worried we would be, but we're going to close with one. Just give the people listening kind of your elevator pitch a little bit. Hey, here's the reason why you should invest X number of dollars in this product. I've looked at it. I read some of the stuff that they've got available on Amazon. The cover's great. Again, I kind of wish we published it, but we won't hold that against you. But if you just want to give everybody a 30-second blurb on why they should buy the book, then we'll finish up after that.
Yeah, here's why you should buy the book, because the book is not about me. And this kind of ties in with one of your earlier questions. Yeah, I wrote a book. Yeah, I had a parachute accident. Yeah, I've experienced some really neat stuff in my life, but that book is really not about me. It's about the person that picks it up and reads it. And I want the person, the reader, to see themselves in the story. And because your story matters. And I think a lot of people sometimes they forget that. They think, hey, my story doesn't matter. Yeah, it does. Your story, your personal life story, it tells a story, but it sings a song. And I say this in the very last chapter of the book. Make sure that the words are kind and the notes are in tune and that they're sweet. And I try to help you navigate that.
And that's
Right.
awesome answer.
Right.
We're so excited to have Rex on today. Maybe we'll do some more stuff with him in the future, but definitely I'll link his book in the show notes down here so everybody click on and buy it. But for Rich and Brian and Rex Davis, Page Break Podcast, we are out.